Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the Basics of Negotiating a Job Offer webinar. My name is Dr. Mary Catherine Arnold, and I'm the Director of Student Affairs for the online campus here at South College. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that you have all been muted. It's important to note that should you have any questions throughout today's presentation, that you type them into the questions and answers box that's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. I'll be sure to set some time aside at the conclusion of today's presentation to review all the questions and concerns that come through. I also wanted to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded. So although I hope that you all have a pen and paper on hand to take some notes, if you happen to miss anything or any of the information or you'd want to go back to review it, I am recording this information for you. So this recording will be available within about 24 hours after the session, and you can obtain that by either emailing me from my contact information that will be on the final screen, or by sending me an email through any of the reminder emails that you received about tonight's presentation. I did also want to let you know that tonight's presentation is going to require some participation. So whenever I ask you to participate, please be sure to do so by clicking the boxes that will be on your screen. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and begin discussing the basics of negotiating. So tonight we're really going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to break it down by talking a little bit about why a lot of people tend to avoid negotiating. What are the reasons why people should negotiate as well? So we'll look at the pros and the cons. Really, there aren't any cons that we're going to talk about, but we'll definitely look at the reasons why you should negotiate and the reasons why people tend to avoid going through that process. We'll also talk about some of the negotiable topics, so things that you can negotiate for when you're in the job off when you've just received the job offer. We'll also talk about we'll talk about the general way a negotiation process will occur, as well as some of the tips that you can use throughout the negotiation process. Before we open it up for questions, and at the conclusion, we'll also be sure to talk about how to handle your nerves during the negotiation process and really what your expectations should be throughout the entirety of the process. So one of the most important items to remember is the way that your negotiation will compound your return. What do I mean by that? So you will see that if you are starting out at a higher salary when raises are given, you will continue to grow your future worth at a faster rate. According to Johansson 2019, data suggests that executives who negotiated their salaries at their first job out of college stood to make at least 500,000 more over their careers compared to those who did not. You will also see that many employers will view you as more confident when you negotiate for more, especially a higher salary. This can be really beneficial whenever you discuss continual growth within an organization as well. Whether you are looking at making a lateral move or moving up the ladder, you are making more than your competition. And if you are making more than your competition because you've negotiated, it may be viewed that you have had more success throughout your organization, your background, and meeting your goals, which will at the end of the day make you be viewed as a more impressive candidate. You should also negotiate because it demonstrates confidence because you're given the opportunity to demonstrate your strengths compared to the objective data and research, including history trends and organizational trends. This will demonstrate that you are empowered by your own success and that you are confident in your abilities to be successful in the role. You also want to remember that an employer is incentivized to pay you as little as possible when they are offering that job. This is to help keep money in the shareholders' hands and drive revenue for that organization. Due to this component, it is important to remember that without pushing for more, you will be operating with less. Employers expect you to negotiate and therefore will typically feel safe with offering you a lower salary initially. Despite that there are many benefits to negotiating, there are many people who do not negotiate, typically because they fear the potential outcomes. One of the most common fears that job seekers have is that there is a fear that the company will retract their offer if you counter with a super high salary or something that the company can't match. This should not be something that stops you from negotiating. As I mentioned earlier with the reasons why you should negotiate, companies expect you to at least negotiate for something, for a little something. Although we will discuss this more in detail in just a minute, remember that if you can justify your negotiation topics, you won't really have to worry about this. In addition, if a company cannot meet your negotiation pieces, they will simply tell you their final offer. Unless you phrase your negotiation pieces in an unprofessional, rude, or demanding way, companies typically don't retract their initial offer. And that brings me to my next point of why people typically avoid negotiating. Some individuals fear that they will appear as too pushy or greedy should they negotiate their salary. Keep in mind that although it does depend on how you negotiate and the words that you use and how you phrase everything during the negotiation, if you've done your research and feel confident with knowing your personal worth, you typically will not come across as being too pushy or greedy. And then this next bullet point is something that we've discussed earlier as well in this presentation, but it's important to remember during the whole negotiation process. Some people fear that the company is offering their maximum salary right from the beginning. If you have these fears, it may help you to keep in mind that the type of company that you are accepting an offer with or that you're negotiating a job offer with. Typically, if it is for a for-profit company, they probably will have a ton of wiggle room. Even most nonprofits will have flexibility. As I mentioned earlier, though, regardless of the type of company, the company is likely driven by the bottom line. This means that although they may recognize that you are worth more, if they can secure your employment at a lower cost, they're definitely going to do so. After all, it's just a business. Another reason why people tend to avoid negotiation is they tend to be afraid that they're going to be starting off the job on the wrong foot. There are a couple of things to consider to help you with combating this notion if this is something that you fear. Keep in mind that, again, employers expect you to negotiate something during the offer. You will also need to remember that as long as you remain professional, polite, and reasonable during your negotiation, you most likely will not have to worry about starting the new job off on the wrong foot. And then this last reason why people typically avoid negotiation is probably one of the hardest things to combat. Many people struggle with feeling confident in what they do or feeling that they know their personal worth. This is something that you can only decide and only you can decide this. I typically encourage those who fear that they will look like they have too high of an opinion of themselves or too low of one to really spend a lot of time doing some research. Review common or similar job titles, their qualifications, and their average salary range. If you meet those qualifications, then you should definitely ask for the same salary that is the standard in that industry and with that type of position. If you are overqualified, then your worth will be greater. And that's the other thing to really think about. Now, the most important thing to remember, no matter what, is that you should always negotiate for your job. But before we jump into talking a little bit about the different features that you can try to negotiate for, I do want to take a quick poll. So I mentioned participation. Here's going to be where we participate. Go ahead on your screen and let me know yes or no if you've ever tried to negotiate a job offer before. All right, so I see a lot of us have. This is great. I'm glad to see that the majority of us here tonight actually have done that. Many people think that when they start their negotiations, the only thing that they're able to negotiate for is salary. But here's one thing that I'm going to tell everyone here tonight is that the fact of the matter is that there tends to be a lot more that you can try to negotiate beyond your salary. Here's a list of some of the most common items that you may want to consider. Yes, salary is most definitely the common one that we hear about. And this is the one piece that I would typically recommend anyone and everyone to negotiate for. Before starting your negotiation for salary, you want to make sure that you complete some research on salaries in similar jobs in your area, as well as nationally. So a great resource for your salary research is to go to either bls.gov, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or go to careeronestop.org. These are two really great resources because you can get a good idea and a good feeling for what the salaries are across the nation. And my favorite one is definitely careeronestop.org because you can also look at the low, the median, and the high And then you can also compare that not only on a national basis, but geographically as well. So you can kind of see based off of your skills where you think you're going to land with that. Now, you may also need to negotiate your start date. Companies want to fill their roles as quickly as possible whenever they're able to. Sometimes it is simply to get someone in that role because they have a desperate need for it. And for others, it may just be simply because they have a large training class starting on a specific day. Regardless of the reason, if you need to give your current employer 2 weeks notice and the new company doesn't have that within the initial offer for the start date, you may need to negotiate that. This is the same thing if you are planning to relocate for a job as well. You may need additional time to find an apartment or a house in that area. Although this isn't super common piece to negotiate in all fields, this may be a piece that you might want to look at negotiating as well in your field, which would be the work schedule. This tends to be extremely common in any of the healthcare professions and some information technology positions. Some items to consider with the work schedule would be if you will be expected to work any on-call shifts. And if so, you can negotiate what shifts and how often you're going to be working on call. For some positions, such as like my nurse practitioner roles out there, you may be able to have a little bit more flexibility with deciding your work hours. So, something to keep in mind. Another thing to focus on when we're negotiating your work schedule is that you want to have some work-life balance wherever possible. So be sure that with the offer that's being presented to you, that you're understanding how does your start and end time for your workday interfere or collaborate with your personal life? How much are you expected to work on your computer after hours and after you leave the office versus while you're in the office? This next topic can be a tough one to negotiate. When looking at PTO or time off, many times companies have strict guidelines as to if this is something that can be negotiated or changed. Typically, PTO and time off is determined by the years of service that you have within a company, and there's not typically a lot of wiggle room with that. But with that being said, it doesn't mean that it's completely off the table, especially with smaller organizations that are out there. If you are going to be a manager, you want to try to negotiate for a higher level of PTO when you're first starting with a company. This can be a nice perk for a position with authority. Another time that you might want to consider negotiating PTO or time off is when you already have some vacations scheduled. If you currently have a vacation scheduled and you will not be receiving enough PTO between your start date and that vacation or the start date and the end of the year, you want to make sure at that time that you're bringing this up in the negotiation process and at least making sure that the hiring manager is aware that you're going to need more time and trying to see if you can negotiate for a couple more days, even if it's just for the first year because you already have that vacation scheduled. Similar to PTO and time off, you will find that in some scenarios, you can also negotiate benefits. Again, in my larger companies, you really aren't going to find this as readily available. However, your mom and pop companies, they tend to have a little bit more wiggle room. Benefits can be anything from your medical, your dental, your vision, or pet insurance, or even extend to retirement savings, continual education assistance, professional organization memberships, etc. So lots of things to think about when we're thinking about benefits. Even for some of those larger organizations, you might find that they might not be able to necessarily give you the benefits of professional organizations the first year, but if they know that that's something that's important to you, then they might be able to negotiate for that in your, or at least budget for it for the second year of your service. Now, this next topic almost goes hand in hand with the work schedule. In today's times, many companies offer the opportunity to either occasionally work from home or work from home for a specific number of days in the year or in the week. Because working from home enables us to better balance our days and time, working from home or telecommuting may be something that you want to look into adding into your negotiations as well. This is something that before you request, you want to ensure that your job could be done from home and that you would be able to align yourself both within the industry standards and the company standards. I know that that's a little weird right now due to COVID because a lot of companies and a lot of places have kind of pushed their employees to work remotely. And that could be something where depending on how long COVID-19 continues to go, it could be something that we see this become a little bit more regular in the office place and in the workplace. But No matter what, you still want to always consider knowing what it's going to look like, especially if you're interviewing and negotiating for a job at this point in time with COVID going on. You want to have a good idea for, once COVID ends, what's their game plan to bring employees back in the office? What would be expected of you? So that way, if there is a way that you could work remotely, that you're negotiating that. And now's the perfect time to start that negotiation piece. And then this last topic of negotiation may sound a little weird to some of us. Let's say hypothetically that the company is already offering you their max for a new hire. One item that you could request and negotiate is a performance review within the first couple of months of being hired. Now, the benefits to trying to negotiate for this is to continue to increase your pay and other benefits in a shorter amount of time rather than what it would take to wait for a potential annual review. Keep in mind, though, that if this is something that you plan on negotiating for, you need to be completely confident that you would be able to meet all of the goals of that position easily. When you request this, otherwise, you risk being seen as someone who is not competent in your job or someone who's undeserving of that high rating. So if you're going to go along this line, you want to make sure that you know without a doubt that you would be able to perform at that high level so that you can get everything that you were looking to get initially with your negotiation. So let's go ahead and talk about the flow of a job offer. Keep in mind that every job offer is going to be, and every negotiation process is going to be unique in its own way. Although this chart's going to walk you through some of the most important steps and general pieces of what you can expect with a job offer, it still might differ for what you might expect. So the first thing that you can expect is the initial phone call for the offer. This is typically going to be done by one of two people. It's either going to be completed by the hiring manager or the human resources representative. This call will go over what we consider a verbal offer. Typically, they will review your pay, your start date, your hours, if and when benefits will be available, and the number of PTO/time off and sick days that are available to you. Some verbal offers may also go into more detail than others. So like I said, it's all going to be unique. But the key to starting the process off on the right step is to be prepared ahead of time when they call you for that offer with a notebook or pen or a blank screen on your computer where you can jot down the information that they're giving. So that way you can go ahead and you can ask any questions that you have, or you can get it all together in one place. The other thing that's helpful is if you really have a good feeling about the job and the job offer, you might want to have a list of all potential questions regarding the offer ahead of time. Having a notebook on hand, whether it has your questions in it at that point in time, or whether you're jotting down the questions that you have as the recruiter or hiring manager is going through that verbal offer, that's still perfectly okay. So that way you can wait until after that individual is done speaking that you can ask all of your questions. In addition, you also want to be prepared again to take those notes for the offer. And because what that's going to do is that's really going to help you to visualize what that offer is actually going to look like. I can tell you I'm a very visual learner. So me being able to see everything on screen or on my paper is really important for me to be able to mentally process everything and think everything through for the next step, next 5 steps, next 10 steps. Once the employer is done reviewing the details, they'll typically ask you if you have any questions reviewing that or any questions regarding that verbal offer. And a lot of times at that point in time, they'll ask if you're willing to accept the offer. Now, at this point in time, you will typically counter the offer with what you plan to negotiate for. Now, keep in mind, you might not necessarily have this right then and there, but at that point in time, when they give you that initial phone call and that initial offer, you can always ask them to take a little bit of time to consider what they've provided to you. But when you're ready, typically you're going to negotiate and you're going to start the negotiation process with your counter offer. Typically, when you're doing this, you want to try to overshoot what you want, especially salary, by about $1,000 to $2,000. This will give the employer the chance to come back and hopefully meet you right where you're looking for. So let's say hypothetically you are not prepared to counter that initial offer right then and there. It happens, guys. I understand. Sometimes the offer isn't what you were expecting them to give. And so you need that time to talk to your spouse or your family, your loved ones, significant others, whoever it might be. You need that time to bounce it off of someone else and see, is it something that we can make do with? But when these types of situations happen, what you would do is you would just want to go and tell the recruiter or the hiring manager, you should ask if you can have 24 hours to think over the initial offer. Employers at that point in time will typically try to pressure you with accepting that offer by saying something like, well, you were the original candidate that we had in mind. We really want to bring you on board. So we do want to try and move through this process as soon as possible. It's really imperative that we fill that role. It's perfectly okay when they pressure you. Just say, I completely understand. I respect that. I hope that it won't even take me the full 24 hours. I'm just asking for the time so I can regroup and I can regroup and think this over and make sure that I have all the details that I need before accepting it. And a lot of times that will be all that they need in order to say, yes, we understand. Just please try and have that answer for us in 24 hours. When they try to pressure you, they're trying to speed up that process and make you settle for less. Because again, it is that company's job to bring you on at a low of a cost as possible. So once you've reviewed your counter offer, the next chance, and once you've kind of had your chance to call the employer back if this was the case, or you've countered your offer right then and there, you want to make sure that you're again doing this as quickly as possible, but that you're showing them that you're serious about working for them, as well as making sure that the offer and the decision is right. But once you've done all of that, the next step that's typically going to happen is that the employer is going to give you a phone call back after they've reviewed the information that you've provided to them, or they're going to, and when they do that, they're either going to agree to your terms or counter again. So keep in mind that this step from the recruiter or hiring manager standpoint might take longer than you are expected to take on your end. The reason for this is that typically the person who is giving you that offer isn't normally the one who can make the final decision whether they want to spend that much money on you as a candidate. So what that typically means is that they would need to go to someone either in the head of finance, or if it was the hiring manager, maybe they'd have to go to human resources to make sure that it's been approved for the amount that you countered. Or maybe it's even going to the president or the vice president of the company. Don't be alarmed if this next step takes about a couple of days, maybe 2 to 3 days. If it's taking that amount of time, it's just because they are seriously considering your counteroffer and they are trying to give you what they can give you and give you the most of what they can give you. At this point, they will either agree when they call you back, they'll either agree or they'll counter your offer one more time. It's not unusual for a negotiation to go back and forth once to two more times. Other than the second time, though, typically, unless you're really pursuing a really high or prestigious position, you're probably not going to be negotiating back and forth multiple times beyond two phone calls. And then the last step in the negotiation process, this is going to be your choice. So depending on what the employer comes back with, it will typically be your chance to either accept the offer as is, or to counter one more time, or to reject that offer. So again, told you it's probably going to go back one, maybe two times between you two. Remember, the employer did choose you and wants you to be on their team, but the employer will have some limitations no matter what. You need to make the choice that's going to make the most sense for you and your situation. If the employer counters your initial offer and you're still not sure about it, you might want to ask and take the same steps that you took it with that second box where we said, okay, well, maybe we need to take 24 hours just to consider the offer. Again, whenever you ask for additional time, be respectful of the employer's time and make your decision as quickly as possible. If you drag out this process, you may annoy the employer or put a bad taste in that employer's mouth. I can tell you, I've had many individuals who have taken a ridiculous amount of time to come back and accept the offer. And then we started off the job on a bad foot. Just because I was annoyed because it was something, well, you shouldn't have interviewed or you should have pulled out sooner if you really weren't sure about this offer. The great thing about all of these steps, though, is that typically employers are pretty fast. When they are ready to make you that offer on that job, they typically know a lot about their limitations. The standard negotiation period, though, is pretty much normally not more than 2 days. In my experience, I've seen many individuals complete this even faster and do it within a matter of a couple of hours. So just be prepared at all times. And my biggest piece of advice with this is to be flexible throughout it. So now that you know the general outline of what to expect with the job negotiation process, let's talk about some other tips that you can use to feel confident with your negotiation tactics. First off, I mentioned this just a moment ago, be reasonable with your expectations. You are more likely to be successful in negotiation when you are seeking something that is fair and that meets industry and company standards. When you go to negotiate, there may not be a ton of items that you can think of that you would like, but always be prepared to negotiate a salary. Even if the employer says that they can only offer you a specific amount, you can always try to wiggle in $1,000 or $2,000 more. Again, this is when being reasonable is going to help you. You also want to try and negotiate for everything at once. If you have a great interview, you should already have gone home and started creating your wish list of everything that you wanted based off of the information that you know. When we talked about our fears in negotiation and why some individuals don't negotiate, we mentioned that it was for fear of putting a bad taste in the employer's mouth. Well, here's the fact of the matter: if the employer has to keep on considering the things that you are requesting because you can't request them all at once, that's going to quickly become an annoying piece. And that's going to really make them, again, make you feel like you might be starting off on the wrong foot. So remember, the employer wants you to start as soon as possible. And that means coming back, being organized and prepared, saying, these are everything that I was looking to negotiate in this process. That's going to be a huge piece to this puzzle. A negotiation that takes days or even weeks is counterproductive to that employer's goals. So again, being efficient on your end is going to help them to be efficient on their end. And then I know that this next bullet point seems really common sense, but job offer negotiations can come out of nowhere and they can take you by surprise, making you feel either rushed or want to push back. No matter what the situation, you always want to be polite and ensure that you're not making crazy demands. Remember, it is always easier when you add a justification behind why you are seeking what you're seeking. And then this next bullet point is one of the most important ones for you to do. And that one is to make sure that you spend the largest amount of time on focusing and time and focus on completing. It is important that you take the time to do your research. If you have researched the standards and what to expect in your area for that specific type of job, you're going to feel more confident in the negotiation process. Not only will you be equipped with necessary information, but you will also have a feeling of more confidence with knowing your worth. And then I already mentioned this next bullet point a couple of times throughout today's presentation, but you will always want to make sure that you are demonstrating the ways that you can contribute to the company. It's going to help you with your confidence as well. Again, if you're able to justify why you are the best choice for the position and why you are worth what you're worth and what you're requesting, you're going to feel more confident and most likely be happier with the outcome. And then lastly, try and keep your emotions in check. Remember that nothing in this process is a personal component. If you do not get what you are requesting, it's simply because the company is not able to give that to you. Remember, they are guided by specific budgets and other restraints too. So if they don't come back and they say, nope, we can't do that, it's not because we don't like you, it's because we can't do that. So, how do you handle some nerves during the negotiation process? So, for those of you who are still sitting out there and saying, I'm not really sure how I would be able to handle this process or how I would be able to handle the negotiations, one of the first things that you can always do, and you've heard me say this multiple times already, is to research and prepare. Know what the going salaries and benefits are in your line of work and industry. Utilize those resources such as Glassdoor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and Career One Stop. And reach out to your career services representative for more information and more guidance and assistance. We'd be more than happy to walk you through and do a mock negotiation as well. That is what we're here for. We're here to help you feel confident and prepared with the negotiation process, as well as the rest of the job search process. If you're still feeling nervous, don't forget to justify your request. Use facts and previous metrics to support your request. This helps to build context and allows the employer to see the significance of what you are requesting. Be honest as well. Never lie in a negotiation process. It typically finds a way to harm you and finds a way to haunt you throughout the rest of your career. This is especially true when we're talking about salary, as it's important to think about the salary piece because human resources, a lot of companies, they can confirm your current salary with the future employer. And that can happen as soon as they do an employment verification. So you want to be honest because if it comes back saying that you were lying about your salary, that could impact your negotiation, number one. Number two, that could impact and negatively impact the job offer, where the job offer might be rescinded. And number three, if it doesn't do any of those things, the hiring manager might already start off with, again, that bad taste in their mouth. They might feel like they're starting your relationship off on a bad foot because they won't really feel like they can trust you in what you're saying, what you're providing to them as well. And then practice. We always are more confident in our delivery when we feel like we have had some practice underneath our belt with our delivery of our expectations and our experiences. Just as if you were on a sports team or playing an instrument or even learning a dance, it is expected that you practice to refine your skills. And the same concept is going to be applied right to here. Again, your career services representative, we're all here to assist you and help you with those for the future as well. And if you're still nervous, try using an I and we strategy. It sometimes helps us to feel like we can explain why we believe that our negotiation is legitimate when we are using this type of strategy. In order to do this, you can simply say something like, I'm excited about this opportunity to work together. However, based on my research about the industry standards and considering my skill set, I would feel more comfortable if we could settle on a base salary of X. So as you can see, I stated in that I and we strategy, I said, I'm excited about this opportunity. But I would feel more comfortable if we together collaboratively were able to settle on this specific base salary. And it also can be really helpful when you're discussing, especially salary, to provide ranges. If you're able to provide a range rather than a single fixed number, you may feel less demanding and be able to closer align yourself to your industry standards. This also demonstrates that you're flexible and that you're willing to cooperate in the negotiation process, which therefore will alleviate some of those fears of being seen as too demanding, greedy, or pushy. So, what are some things that you should expect during the negotiation process? So, I'm always going to tell my students again, every negotiation process is slightly different, but you can always expect between 24 to 48 hours for a response. Again, so as far as expectations go, ask for 24 hours to consider the offer. It's expected that you might not necessarily be able to accept the offer right then and there, right on the spot. It's not unusual or unheard of for you to need that additional time. But the expectation is that you don't take very long. So if you can ask for less than 24 hours, that's exactly what you want to be doing. You also want to be prepared for the three possible outcomes of either countering between 2 to 3 times, accepting the job, or walking away. I know none of us really liked the idea of we've gone through all this trouble to interview for a position, to try and negotiate for this position, to feel really prepared for this opening and then to have to walk away. It's not ideal, it's not something that we love to do, but it does happen from time to time. You can't be afraid to make the decision that's going to be best for you in your career, your future growth, and for your family and yourselves. You need to make sure that whatever you decide is going to work for you, not only in the short term, but in the long term process as well. Not every company will be able to give you annual raises. So you don't want to bank on that. Even if you do get annual raises and they somehow guarantee you that you will always see some type of increase, whether it's a cost of living increase or a raise in your salary based off of performance, you still don't want to rely on that because you never know. You could just have a really bad year or a really bad quarter that would negatively impact your ability to get that raise. So again, if that initial offer that you're negotiating for isn't going to fit, don't be afraid to walk away. So hopefully now you all have a thorough understanding of how to negotiate a job offer. I will say to be sure to not only utilize the information that was presented in tonight's presentation, but to also reach out to your career services representative for more information and more guidance. You may also find it helpful to review the career services workbook that's located in your library underneath the career resources option in the research guides tab. But before we do end today's session, I would like to open up the floor for any questions or concerns that you may have. So at this point in time, if you haven't already typed in your questions, please feel free to do so that I can go ahead and I can answer them. So the first question is, do you recommend that we negotiate for higher than what we want? Absolutely. So I mentioned this in earlier in the presentation, but you might have missed it. Generally speaking, you want to try to negotiate for approximately like $2,000 higher in the salary than what you initially want, because a lot of times employers are going to look at about a $5,000 window. So you want to go in with the same exact process with that. Worst case scenario is that you're going to end up a little bit short. Best case scenario is that you're going to end up with exactly what you're asking for. What should I do if I want to turn down the offer? So that's a really good question. I think, one of the biggest things that you have to remember when you're rejecting an offer is that you want to be and maintain professionalism throughout the entire negotiation process. So the one first step that you want to take if you're going to turn down an offer is that you want to make sure that you're contacting the individual who you were working with throughout the negotiation process via phone. You want to make sure that you're not sending an email to that individual, because emails are very impersonal, and being able to speak with that recruiter or that hiring manager or whoever's offering you that on the phone is going to be huge in making sure that you are and it's going to be huge in making sure that um, that you are maintaining your professionalism and that you're being respectful and courteous of all the effort that they've put into the process of trying to hire you for that role. Do not leave a message and do not send an email response. You can always send an email response if you're saying, I do have a decision made, but I wanted to speak with you in person. If you could please let me know your availability, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll be available today between 1 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That something like that is perfectly acceptable, but you do not want to say, thank you so much for working with me throughout this process. Unfortunately, I have decided to pursue other avenues at this point in time. Don't send an email like that. Now, eventually, once you have rejected rejected the offer from the recruiter, you do want to eventually send a like a thank you email and a follow-up email to the hiring manager and everyone else that you've come across in that interviewing process. Because you want to make sure that you leave everything on a good note, and making sure that they know that this was something that you still were really passionate about and that you still would have loved to have joined their company. Because you never know, if they have a future opening where they would be able to offer you more money or whatever you were looking for, then that might be just enough for them to remember that they wanted to initially give you that offer, and that they would like to still bring you on if it's possible. This next question is, what types of benefits do you see the most common in negotiation? I will say that a lot of times, again, it is going to really depend on your field, and the level of the position that you're looking for. You may find it helpful to look at the salary, the start date, and the time off as your main pieces to start off with. Remember that you may also want to consider the things that are most important with you. I always like to say that negotiating a job is very similar to when you are purchasing a house, where there might be some things that are non-negotiable and some others that are. So, for instance, when I was purchasing my house, I would have loved to have a dishwasher, but I was unable to find that along with everything else. And something that was more important to me was having a built-in garage, because it gets cold in Pittsburgh in the winter. So I wanted to not have to walk outside to get into my car before I go to work every morning. So that was a non-negotiable item for me, versus the dishwasher was kind of a negotiable item. It was a wish list item, but it wasn't something specific. And that's the same exact way and the same type of approach that you want to include and think about and consider when you are talking about what benefits and what items you want to negotiate in your job offer. And do I see any, and I just want to give it one more minute just to see if any other questions come through before letting you go. All right. Well, I don't see anyone typing. So again, I want to thank you all for attending tonight's session and seminar. I hope that you found the information in tonight's session to be very beneficial. Should you happen to run into any additional questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to let me know. My contact information is on the screen, so you can reach out directly to me, and I can get you those answers, or I can push you right to your career services representative, especially if you're at one of our ground campus locations. So again, please feel free to let me know if anything else comes up. Otherwise, I just ask that you all take a brief couple of minutes just to complete our short survey, our 4-question survey that just lets us know what additional topics you would like to receive some training on, some seminars on, if you would like to see any types of guest presenters come in, what type of guest presenters that you want to see. Our goal is that we're always meeting what you need and what you're looking for as a student and or alumni of South College. So again, everyone, thank you so much for attending this evening, and I hope that you have a wonderful night.